So today's session is called But I'm Not Privileged, Why Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Are Everyone's Problem. And it is presented by the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Team. I am not advancing the slides.
You can click on there, but...
Here we go. I'm Tara. I work at Pantheon as Developer Outreach Manager. I am also the lead of Drupal Diversity and Inclusion. I am all over the internet at Sparkling Robots, Drupal.org, Twitter, everywhere. My pronouns are she or they. Little plug, thanks to Pantheon for sending me here and sponsoring my work on Drupal Diversity and Inclusion. And we're also hiring, and I would love to work with people who care about this stuff, so talk to me afterwards, and I'll let Ruby introduce herself.
You can just stay there. I'm Ruby Sinreich, and I'm one of the founding members of the leadership team of the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Group. I work at Moms Rising, which I also want to give a shout out to. It's a national advocacy group, a wonderful organization, and they super support me doing all this stuff, even though there's no direct reward for them of me doing this work. But they believe in open source and in making the community better. So I want to give them some props. And I'm Ruby G everywhere in the world except on Twitter, where I'm just Ruby. So you can find me.
Just Ruby, the coolest. We wanted to acknowledge the land that we're giving this presentation on today. This is the land of the Ohlone people. It gets a little more complicated than that. We do have a post on our website on DrupalDiversity.com about what land acknowledgements are, why they're important, and specifically more history of the Bay Area. So if that's interesting to you, go take a look. Today we're going to discuss 4 things. We're at a technology conference, so why are we talking about racism? 2, well-intended attitudes that don't actually help. 3, some things you can do to make a difference. And 4, who is Drupal Diversity and Inclusion? And now I'm turning over to Ruby.
So a lot of people, you especially hear this in open source, but probably really everywhere, talk about the importance of the code, and they say who really cares? I don't care who made it or whatever, right? Is the code good or bad? The thing is that code isn't just digits and figures. Code is made out of people, much like the nefarious SOYLENTGREEN, which people over 40 might understand. But the code is made by people, and we put our values into everything that we make. Come on in, y'all. We're just getting started. Look, oh my gosh, the gang's all here. Welcome, everyone. Sorry, by the way. No, you just doubled the size of the room. So
yeah, come on in.
We are not complaining. Welcome, everybody. As I was saying, code is made of people and their values. So it matters what our values are and what values we put into the code. A lot of people think that there's some objectivity or neutrality, especially that you can put into software. A lot of journalists talk about objectivity, but none of us can help but centering our own perspective. That's the perspective that we had. And Ken Ricard did a great talk at Drupal Europe where he said that monocultures often can't see their own biases. So we all personally have biases, but also when there's a lot of us that are all very similar, then we're especially blind to that. So we need to stop believing that there's some kind of neutral ideal that is guiding everything, because all of it is our own perspectives. Everyone has values. There's art that you like or don't like, there's food you like, there's people you like and don't like. You have values. Those are biases. That's not necessarily bad. You also grow up with your own family's culture and history, your neighborhood's culture and history. Those are things that give you values and biases too. Maybe you love well-documented code and you hate Flash. Those are also values that you have. So nobody's actually neutral. But programmers have a tendency to try to see themselves as the default, right? Especially when we're in one of those monocultures or we're not challenged by a lot of different other views. So we have to remember that we have all these patterns in our own brains and we're imprinting them on the things that we create. By the way, I'm trying really hard to read my notes to keep myself from rambling, but it's also going to make me a little more awkward because I'm trying to read my notes. We often make things based on some ideal we think we have, and then it turns around, maybe it kicks our butt like Ex Machina. An example of when this happened was last year, Amazon thought they'd be really smart, take lots of bias out of hiring and make an algorithm do it because humans are so flawed, right? but they fed the algorithm with data based on who they had been hiring before. So anybody heard of garbage in, garbage out? Literally the word women in someone's resume, like women's sports in college or went to a women's college, would cause the algorithm to rank applicants lower just because of having the word women. And as it says, the result of it was that people named Jared were basically preferred by the algorithm, and people who played high school lacrosse. So, like, creating an algorithm doesn't solve the human bias problem, right? It actually just reifies the problem and reinforces it. So we all have these personal biases. Oh, wait.
It doesn't matter. You can go. You're in the flow. Go. So we all have these personal biases, and that's just what it is to be human. But when we start building our institutions and encoding it like in these algorithms, that's when we start to get structural inequality. So kind of a long quote, but what this really gets at is that even in the absence, it's like science has shown, even in the absence of biased individuals, biased outcomes still happen, right? So there could be no biased individuals in a corporation. It'll still make biased outcomes if that's baked into how the structure was built in the first place. So these systems that we build naturally privilege certain people, whether or not you choose that privilege. To talk about privilege, which I think sometimes can be a little challenging for folks, there is this awesome John Scalzi article that uses video gaming as a metaphor. And basically, it takes the most privileged class in American society, which is the straight white male, and says, this is playing on easy mode. Doesn't mean you won't win, doesn't mean you won't have challenges, doesn't mean that you asked to play on easy mode. It just means that every monster you encounter is not quite as tough, and you're likely to get better loot, right? So these privileges happen. It's not like you didn't ask for them, and it's not your fault that you have them. But I think it is our responsibility to take whatever privileges we have, and everyone does have some privilege, and use that to build equity in our community here in Drupal and in the world at large. I think it's back to you.
So as Tara said, because of structural inequality, we don't have to be racist for racism to be perpetuated in our systems. We don't have to be sexist or ableist or anything else for those things to be perpetuated. But, and we also are bringing all of our privilege into various situations. And so instead of having the fantasy meritocracy that we like to believe open source is, we actually have a very uneven playing field. And that has an impact both on the quality of the community, who feels comfortable in these spaces, who comes to events because they are, don't worry that they're going to be free of harassment, things like that. But then that also is going to impact the code, right? Because that affects who can participate in the community. So it's really for everyone's benefit to have a more inclusive community that where everyone can participate in. So
this is the next section. So these are well-intended attitudes that don't actually help. One example is the classic sending thoughts and prayers. Doesn't actually help. Every attitude that we're going to cover here is something that we have seen in the Drupal community from well-meaning people. I have held many of these attitudes. They are things that seem good on the surface and are not. I'm happy to talk afterwards if anybody has questions about one that particularly held dear in your heart or anything like that. So we'll just get started.
All right, so one of the first fallacies is this idea that openness is sort of the highest ideal, and if the community is open and there's no gates up, at least you don't think there's gates up, then it's open to everyone and everybody has the ability to come in and participate. And that if we're all just civil and we tolerate everybody, then everyone has the opportunity to participate. But nope, that's not actually how it works. Because if you tolerate people that make others feel unwelcome, then that's not actually a completely open community, right? So you actually, and this is very counterintuitive to some people, which is exactly why we're talking about this. And it's understandable why you would think that tolerance and openness would be good, and they are to a certain point, right? But there's actually a limit. And it's actually more inclusive to include less people. And that's why we have codes of conduct and things like that. They are essential to making the community open to the people that you actually want to be there. So this also gets to tone policing, people liking to, want you to be civil, things like that. Let's see. Oh,
Just hit the nope again.
okay. Sorry about that. Double nope on that. This philosopher, Karl Popper, wrote, check the year. As you can see, this is right after World War II and Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, where he talked about unlimited tolerance does not lead to meaningful tolerance, right? Should we be tolerant of Nazis? Like, oh, well, they just have a different view. No, thank you, because they actually would like to kill me. And so I'm not going to feel very included if you're tolerant of that. So there has to actually be a limit. Otherwise, the actual good values will be destroyed. And I made a simple Venn diagram because some people really don't get this. But tolerance cannot include intolerance. So if people are, if there's an idea that's intolerant and excludes other people, it doesn't fit within the tolerance circle. Okay.
This is one that I have personally subscribed to, which is open source is a meritocracy, right? I love open source. I think it's fantastic. And everyone gets a chance to contribute, right? So it's just the best and brightest rise to the top. This is not true. The thing that really brought this home for me is that seeing the numbers in proprietary software versus open source software in terms of gender diversity. So in the US, proprietary software development communities have 27% women versus 73% men. Not great considering the difference in the population, but okay. In open source, it's 2%. I mean, like, I was very upset to find this. Like, if I can just go onto a issue queue and make my little anonymous username, what's the problem here, right? There are a number of factors that contribute to this uneven playing field that Ruby talks about in open source. One of the ones that we talk about a lot is free time. So a lot of underrepresented communities often are taking care of children or parents or working two jobs because they aren't working in some like fancy cushy agency job, right? So they don't have time on the weekends to go home and give back to Drupal. I am an extremely privileged person in this community. I entered because I had the time to teach myself. I don't have kids. I am a healthy, able-bodied person and speak English, which is what Drupal's sort of lingua franca. A lot of people don't have that option in that time. So this slide's actually from the Dries note, which we worked on. If you were in Seattle, you probably saw it.
So another issue that we hear a lot is we can't solve everything, right? So like, let's just deal with gender first, or even just women's issues first, and then we'll do race, and then we'll do trans folks, and then we'll work on letting immigrants in, like one at a time. And the problem with this is you're setting people up against each other. And everyone faces more than one barrier. We don't have just one kind of privilege, and we don't have just one kind of bias that we suffer from too. If you only do programs that say like for women in tech and don't address other barriers, then what you're actually doing is just helping white women in tech, right? And then maybe a few other lucky people who are scrappy or fortunate enough to be able to get in there. So what we have to do instead is have an intersectional view. This is Kimberlé Crenshaw, who coined the term in 1989 of intersectionality. And the point is not to look at one issue at a time in a silo, but to think about how issues intersect in different people's lives. I don't just face barriers in Drupal because I'm a woman. I also am a single parent, and I live in the South. Not exactly like, when's the last DrupalCon we had anywhere near me? No. There's lots of different barriers. That's one I don't really mind. One of my favorite examples of this is a friend of mine who is a lesbian and has been with her partner forever. They got married, but before it was legally recognized, my friend was at risk of getting kicked out of the country because she was Canadian. A straight couple who was married would not have that problem, right? So there's like various different issues that are intersecting there. When we put them against each other, then we all lose. So if you have one of these barriers, think about allying with other people instead of putting your thing in front of their thing or against their thing.
The good old, but we try so hard. The thing we really have to talk about here is intent and impact, right? If I drop an anvil on Ruby's foot, her foot is broken, whether or not I slipped or threw it on her, right? She's still going to be pretty unhappy. And that is true with all of these things, right? You can be well-intentioned, but if you're still having the same impact, this goes back to that structural inequality piece, you're still having a negative impact, right? So I think also like test-driven development, like write the tests first. What's the impact you want to have? And then reverse engineer your behavior if you want, but you can't, you don't get off the hook just because you didn't mean to, right? It really matters what your impact is as well as what you're trying to do for folks.
You all have seen this. I know you have, right?
Not invent this.
There's one really bright person. Oh, she's so articulate, right? She understands these issues. Let's put her in charge of things. Let's don't, though. There are a couple of problems with this. So let me unpack a few of them. First of all, you can't expect marginalized people to do the work of fixing problems because they're marginalized. They actually have less power in the situation. They're not the ones who can change your company culture, right? They're the ones who are barely getting by and pretending that they like the bar that all the dudes want to go to, right? They are not in a position to make that kind of structural change. And in fact, they're having sometimes to battle just to exist. And frankly, a lot of people, especially if they have various issues working against them, just want to write their code and go home because they're tired of having to exist in your space. They want to go back home to their own space. So they don't have the power to fix systems and cultures that are toxic. In addition, it's tokenism. By lifting up just one or a small number of diverse people, and I have a huge issue with using diverse in relation to a singular noun, but that's part of the view that we're talking about. And then you say, oh, but look, see, we're diverse now because we have a person or two people on this committee, right? And then you think you're all done. Now, I will defend tokenism in one situation. Sometimes it's the first step toward more stuff, right? Somebody has to be the first not straight white male on your committee, okay? So that's not necessarily tokenism if they're the first one, but if you do that and you stop there, then that's tokenism, and it's definitely not changing any structures. In fact, sometimes it's just validating structures that aren't changing at all, right? So it's not real diversity. And as you can see here, there's a lot of different words we can use. You see the words diversity, inclusion, equity, and they're not all interchangeable. So having diverse faces sitting at the table is a good thing to do. It's not that you don't want to do it, but it doesn't mean those people feel included. You might not have changed the culture at all, right? So you need to think about all of these different steps, and also especially the reality picture there. I think is actually an important one to put in because it's not like we're all coming in from the same place. We've been hitting these barriers our whole lives for various reasons, and so the idea that someone might need a little extra mentoring or something, it's to address the imbalance of the reality that came in the first place.
Okay, so now that we've just really gone down like a sad thing where everything is wrong, we're going to show our optimistic side and talk about some things you can do today or in the near future to help you be a better ally, build a safer, stronger Drupal community. So this is obviously a very famous Gandhi quote.
I apologize for the janky. This was supposed to fly in like the other pictures.
It actually, I think it's going to do this and then go back.
Oh my god. That's even jankier.
It's great. We do this. It's all volunteer committee. So the first one I would say is say hi to new people. Right? Like if this is your first year at Bad Camp or your first Drupal event, you are excused from this activity. But a lot of people know a lot of other people in the Drupal community. It can be very isolating to be like the one new person. If you're already feeling isolated for demographic reasons because you're an underrepresented person, it's worse. So say hi. It's not that hard, right? I like to do this all the time. This is a practice you can take from this room out into your life. So notice who's in the room and notice who is not in the room. Right? So this room, based on the rooms I've been at Bad Camp, looks a little different in terms of who is here. If you look at like a DrupalCon pictures, it's just like a sea of white people screaming. There are people of color there, but it's harder to see. So notice who's in the room and who's not. And then if you find yourself in a little place of power, you got some, clout where you are, notice it and mention it. Just mention, this committee has absolutely no one on it who's not a man or whatever's missing. Familiarize yourself with the code of conduct for events you attend. I think we all take these for granted. A lot of them are basically the same, But take a look at it. See what's on there. See what's protected. See what it asks you to do. Bad Camp Code of Conduct is pretty solid. It actually specifically lists a bunch of behaviors that are not tolerated under harassment. And I don't think everyone necessarily realizes, A, that these things happen at events, and they do, and B, maybe they're doing something that could be construed as following or could be construed as taking pictures inappropriately. So just take a look at them. I would say, underrepresented people are looking at these, making sure that the event is safe for them. So be an ally and know what they know. Hold space for and amplify the voices of others. This one is sort of big. Things like, if your underrepresented colleague is speaking, says something smart and nobody picks up on the idea, repeat it, but also credit them. The number of times I've had my ideas repeated by other people in a room without getting credited is beyond counting. If you notice that your colleagues are getting interrupted a lot, just politely call out your other colleague. Hey, you always talk over Ruby. Just give her a minute, right? You can also do like data visualization stuff. You can run a timer based on how often certain groups are speaking. This is a scarf knitted by a mayor in, I think, town in Quebec. Sue Montgomery is her name. One color is for when men are speaking, and one color is for women are speaking. I will let you decide which one you think is which. So there's ways to also, even if you can't fix it, right? You can't tell everyone when they can talk. You can at least highlight and visualize that for people so that they start to become sensitized. Be prepared to interrupt harassment and other problematic behavior. This one takes practice, in my experience. You're on an airplane and somebody says something racist to you or whatever, thinks like, especially, I'm a white person, they'll be fine, she'll think it's funny. And then you panic and you freeze. So practice saying things like, that's not funny. I don't want to make that joke. Practice if you hear your colleagues misgendering a coworker, correct them. It takes practice, but it's actually not this like world-ending explosion of awkwardness. It will be fine. So just kind of take a moment. You can also do bystander training if you want like a more structured way of practicing. Talk to friends and colleagues about issues that matter to you. So, if you've got that privilege that we're talking about, we all have some privilege, use it to advocate for someone else. Maybe your colleague is tired of asking for accommodations for their diet. Maybe you can say, hey, maybe we should have these different kinds of food available at every company event. Use your privilege to advocate for others. Sponsor people with less privilege than you. This gets a little more concrete. Maybe someone at your company needs to speak at an event and can't get there. See if you can find money for them. Donate your airline miles. Offer yourself as a mentor. Offer a job. A lot of times we don't really need a mentor. We are experienced humans with skills. We just need a job. So offer concrete help to these folks.
Being an advocate for them.
Be an advocate for them. And then last but not least, not everyone here maybe can do recruitment and hiring, but fix that. I know I've also had conversations with someone who's saying, oh, there's no women in the field. We just try so hard. I'm not like going to slide my resume across the table at that point, even if I absolutely could do the job. So, make sure you're looking at fixing recruitment and hiring and just believe that we exist. Underrepresented people do exist in tech. We do have skills, and we are here to contribute. Lastly, and probably least important, participate in Drupal diversity and inclusion. I'd love to have you there, but probably some other stuff matters more. So who are we? We are a group founded by Nikki Stevens. Nikki's awesome. And they basically said, we need something in Drupal. Nobody else is doing it. I'm going to be the one to make a safe space. Well, it feels a little like self-centered, but I'm going to make the space for other people to come in and make the Drupal community better. We work on a ton of issues because intersectionalism is real, including things we've talked about already, ageism, mental health, language barriers, discrimination based on body size or appearance. All kinds of things are important, and we talk about them all the time. This is our leadership team. These folks are the ones who are actively doing work every day, running initiatives, running meetings. And then,
I was just going to say, one of those notice who's in the room moments.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right? So, we need a lot. We could use some different kinds of people involved. We're more diverse than we look, but we could use a lot more.
Yeah. And then this is our advisory team. These folks kind of, Ruby is the most on-the-ground advisor. Remember, she's always out here giving talks with me. Help us do sort of long-term planning and vision. Our efforts are wide-ranging. We do weekly meetings in Slack. We have a lot of community building, creating safe space for folks to talk about stuff they don't feel comfortable talking about at work. We offer advice and feedback to community leaders, like we worked with Dries on the Dries note, do some rabble rousing and make some ruckus sometimes. And then we also do education and skill building within our own community. So most recently, we just did a version of this here at Bad Camp. We offered a speaker training. So if you're an underrepresented person and you've ever wanted to speak at a Drupal event, we did an online training and then an in-person to help people conquer imposter syndrome, create a topic, pitch, title, all the stuff to talk at any event. And we are actually really excited to train the trainers. So if you would like to help your community get over some of these hurdles that are facing underrepresented people, sign up. It is free. It's like 3 hours, I think, on November 16th. And then you can take this into your community, do it online, just like go, do it everywhere. There's no restrictions. So register for that. We also have a scholarship for the Code of Conduct training that the CWG is offering. So we'd love to see more marginalized folks taking reports, because it means something different when you've been aggressed, like microaggressed or harassed in the same way. So we're trying to find underrepresented folks who also do event planning in any context really. And we're offering one scholarship. They're professional trainings, they're kind of expensive. So please spread the word. If you're not that person, you know someone who's that person, send the link. It closes Monday, so it's soon. All right, I'm gonna just, these are the ways to get involved. Come to our weekly meetings, follow us on Twitter, and then we're gonna do questions.
In Slack, we don't just have weekly meetings too. We have developed really a whole community in there over the last couple of years. So there's a general diversity inclusion channel in the Drupal Slack, but then we have all these other ones that are prefixed DDI. So like there's DDI careers to talk about job stuff, DDI chat for social stuff because that's part of the community building. So our DDI chat gets used for DDI support. We've sort of invented because the support channel itself is not always that welcoming. So it's a really good way to you can come in and lurk in there and even see, if you want to hang out with us.
Yeah.
You do though. You totally do.
We left 15 minutes for questions because we think this is always the best part. Or discussion, I should say. It doesn't have to be questions.
Thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Could you say more about what the difference is between diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll start and you can fill in if you have other stuff. Diversity is something that can be measured in numbers, for example. Like this team has 1 woman and 9 men. I know, keep in mind gender is just one example, okay, but just, and so if you improved that to having 5 or 6 women and 5 men, that would be a more gender diverse team, at least, right? But if the men are still running the meeting, setting the agenda, and everybody has to participate on their terms, right? Like sometimes there's some stereotypically male styles where like everyone talks over each other, nobody calls on the person who wasn't saying anything, some of that kind of stuff. The women may still be in the room, but they're not really included. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
I recently gave a talk on personal power.
Oh.
And I think this is where this all emanates from. Just quickly, I grew up in a very wealthy community where everyone was treated as they were going to be a general. So when I walk into a room, I don't feel these things that people that look like me usually feel, that everyone's thinking, oh, she must feel this. And so it's a great disguise, first of all. And the point of my talk is that we all have to encourage everyone else's personal power. It's not something you can do yourself very easily. It's if you didn't grow up with that, it's a foreign language to you, and you don't have any steady place to come from, and you're always questioning yourself. So my suggestion is don't question yourself. Go with your gut. Be the general that you really are, and go with your day-to-day research of how things are going, and speak up.
And if you were raised, say perhaps you are a straight white male with a fairly privileged background, and you were raised always being told that you were the general, maybe take a step back and question why, if something looks, these people are doing this wrong, whatever. Like, take a step back and be like, actually, what assumptions am I bringing into this? Maybe I need to be quiet and listen for a minute,
Yeah. So I take it away from a racial thing because I have a lot of friends who are white males that should have power, and they are totally fucking powerless. They are like so wimpified that it's like they're scared to say anything. Like when you're saying, stand up and defend someone. It's like, yeah, right. I'm going to do that? No.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and we've had a lot of conversations about that. And as like with the John Scalzi thing, it's not that if you have white privilege, it doesn't mean you get everything, right? You could still grow up poor. You could still be queer and isolated by your family. You could still be uneducated. However, you may still have challenges, but you won't have challenges because of your appearance, of your racial appearance, at least.
True.
So white privilege doesn't go away.
You get X'd out of the good old boys group.
That's very true.
You don't have that problem.
Yeah.
That's true in some ways. And that's actually a good example of how to use our privilege in some ways. And most of the time, it's not a zero-sum game. But there are times when, when you speak up for a marginalized group, you lose status in the powerful group.
Yes.
That can happen.
That's the problem people fear.
But it doesn't happen all the time. And again, there's so many different scenarios. Like, when I go into a store, people don't know I'm anti-racist. They just see a little white girl who does not look very threatening,
Yes.
So I do still have privilege in that situation. It really varies. Also, people don't know that I'm Jewish when I'm moving through the world.
Right.
But I have a lot of fear about that sometimes. But you can't even tell from looking at me, So it's so complicated.
I found it interesting when I found out people were afraid of me.
Wow.
Really?
We could use this information.
Yeah, there's so many pluses and benefits for you having missed a lot of the racist socialization that a lot of people get.
Yeah.
It's
Strange.
Yeah.
But cool.
Yeah.
When I saw the equation about intent not equal to impact, I had these two stories come up to my mind where diversity and inclusion, I won't say goes overboard, but people take it in a very different way. So at school, I'm from University of Michigan, we have a writing center, and then we have an English language institute to help international students. I grew up in an English-speaking household, and I went to a British school. So I didn't have that issue. I had an issue with an academic paper, so I went to the writing institute, and I'm like, I need help. They looked at me and they were like, oh no, you should definitely go to the language institute. I'm like, no, I need a writing institute. They were like, no, they are there to help you. I just left. I didn't get help from either place because I felt excluded, even though their intent was to help me.
Yeah,
Right.
They were being racist because they saw what you look like and that you have an accent or
So
something.
that was where their intent was pure in terms of getting me the best help they thought I needed. And on the other hand, I have this friend who is American but is not Caucasian and walked into a bank, and the bank manager rushes to him to help whatever he talks to that person. And they're like, oh, can I have your passport and your so-and-so documents? And he's like, I'm American.
Wow.
So little things like where people make it, she's just trying to be helpful and try to expedite the process, but that was exclusive.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
people are making assumptions based on race, basically.
Yeah, I think both of your stories, I think I try really hard to not assume things about people because I think there is this oh, you're like a woman in tech, you must be new, or you're not from there's all these things that are just so counterintuitive, and it's, I think, to all of our best interests that the Drupal community get better at not assuming knowledge, oh, it's so easy, just just do it, it's not hard, but also not assuming ignorance. And I feel like sometimes people flop over to just oh, you just don't know anything, or you're new here or something, and it's well, it's not true. Yeah.
I have a good cure for that. When I see anyone new, anyone on the street, everywhere, I see them as an 8-year-old.
Amazing.
Every single person. And I meet them as an 8-year-old. And it works. Try
I've
it.
never heard that strategy. That's so interesting.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, Sally?
Sorry, not really on the question in my head yet. Something you were saying about, if we create spaces for women, we're generally only not be white women. And something I've been struggling with a bit of work, we've tried to create spaces that are just for women, just so we can kind of support each other. And I know a few people have sort of felt a bit uncomfortable by that, because they're like, but what about everyone here? We want everyone to see all the struggles we're going through. Like, that's fine, but I also don't want to watch us like a fish. I just don't know what to say to...
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or like, you know, if there's other groups that want support, like they should feel free to make their own private places, or maybe we shouldn't be having private space. I don't know.
That's a great challenge, because it's true in both directions. And just to complicate your thing, what I thought you were going to say too is like, what about trans women? Do they feel included? What about non-binary people who don't identify as male or female? And so, yeah, it's really problematic, frankly. And yet at the same time, we really do, like, there are unique issues that are faced based on race or based on gender identity or various things. And we sometimes do need a space to be with our people and talk about our stuff safely with each other. But at the same time, there's also a need for us to be together. And in Drupal diversity and inclusion, it pretty much is founded from an intersectional perspective. And so there's people involved who, who are totally, straight, white, privileged men. And we welcome that, because frankly, who's going to fix this? Like, like if I work for a sexist institution, then I'm not going to be able to change it because no one's going to listen to me, right? So, some people use the word ally, like that we would want allies involved. There's also, we didn't put this slide in, but sometimes there's in some versions there's been this great scale, right, from like all the way from being an enemy on one end to just being sort of neutral, like I don't really care about your problem, but I'm not actively trying to stop you, to being an ally and being like, oh, I'm a friend to you, I want good things for you. But further down that scale is being an accomplice. And that is where you're willing to put your privilege on the line, for example, and to make sacrifices. For a man to speak up in a meeting and be like, y'all keep talking over the women. Can you be more thoughtful about that? Because that is going to cost the man a little bit of status to do that, right? But that's what it means to be an accomplice. And we are all about everybody doing this work together. And just like I may have barriers for in some ways, I also have privilege in other ways. So it's not like there's the aggrieved people and the powerful people. We're all sort of in this spectrum. We all have some privilege. We're all marginalized in some ways. So for the most part, it's for everybody. But like at DrupalCon, there is like an event just for women and femmes and that kind of thing. And personally, I think those are important too, because there's stuff I'm going to talk about that I frankly don't feel comfortable talking about in front of men. And I won't be able to have those conversations if it's an open space.
It's funny, it's only until the last few years, maybe when this group kind of came up, that I actually felt really awkward about going to the women in Drupal events. Mm-hmm. I used to avoid any women in X events at all, because it just made me feel like, I don't know, can't play at the big boys table, we're going to go to the women's one. Mm-hmm. And actually it's not really about that, it's just that I can have a space to talk to people without having to handhold and roll my eyes all evening.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've got questions before about don't you feel tokenized by benefiting from a women's program or a whatever kind of program? And frankly, no. I need every opportunity that I have access to. So I don't mind if there's a scholarship for women to do something or other that I want to do. Now, some people may not want that, but I have had barriers because of it, and I'm not at all insulted. I don't feel less than because a program might benefit me in that way. But people do have issues with it.
I do too. I've always wondered, what is the black community? I don't know. Is there a black community? Who defines it?
There's lots. Just like there's not one women's community and one way to be a woman. There's a lot of different communities, but there's definitely a very real community.
To disparage people in our current day. The black community is doing this. What black community?
Yeah, it's a form of tokenization to lift up one person and be like, what do black people think about this, Mickey?
Yes, exactly. Just like President, whatever his name is, said, the Black Caucus to a black reporter. You know them, don't you?
Yeah.
What's that?
Right. Totally.
Great. So I think that's exclusion in a weird way.
So, Ruby, you mentioned the DDI Slack as an intersectional, open place for curious people, allies, accomplices, all these things. But there are in the Drupal Slack private channels that people don't know about, that are for providing some of these same spaces for some of these different kinds of groups. And so there's a, I don't know, established pattern of doing both. Because sometimes you want an open place where people can learn and observe, and sometimes you want a safe place where like Sally said, you don't have to handhold. And right now, providing both kind of seems like a good idea.
Absolutely. I would be frustrated without both. The Women in Tech Happy Hour, which was organized by the DA for many years, was always open to all kinds of people. And some of us have made a request to them to say, can we also have like a BOF that is just not men, like a non-binary, femmes, whoever, but just not men in the room. And that's a different event. And so for a while we've had both. You know, there's a reception for everybody who's a champion of women in tech. But then there's also a space for not men to be together and talk to each other where it's safer, we can talk about certain issues, we just don't have to deal with certain behaviors. I mean, frankly, even in the diversity and inclusion channel, sometimes I see problematic behaviors. And often we'll call things in there if we see that. But sometimes we need a back channel about that. So if people want to know about the back channels, talk to me and Kathy, because we'll hook you up. Yeah.
So you just said call in, and I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit about calling out versus calling.
Sure. There's a great group called Surge. What does it stand for?
Standing up for racial justice.
That. And one of their great principles, it's a group for primarily white people, not exclusively to work on racial justice, because again, it's our problem to work on. And one of the things that they talk about is when you see somebody doing something problematic, instead of calling them out and being like, you're a racist, and then they feel crappy and they feel guilty and they just want to go away and they feel defensive. Instead, calling them in and saying, you know, I know you didn't mean to, but what you said may have hurt this person, and you know, this is how it could be done better. So instead of doing it in a way that pushes someone away, it pulls them in, and you know, you assume that they are part of your community and that they want to do it with you and that they're going to care about this. So it weaves them back in. Is that
Good.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to the public-private thing, which is I think a lot of, I'll speak for myself, but I think a lot of marginalized people who found success in open source are like of a type, which is to say a lot of times we have a thicker skin. Maybe we have a lot of privileges that make us fit in for various reasons, right? Like I like technology and I don't feel weird about that. And it's like, I was raised by a programmer and I have all these things that allow me to converse freely and easily with people in open source and have allowed me to fit in, right? But especially as Drupal's like a really unique open source where it's both very technical and very sort of end user focused. There's kind of these different groups that are involved. And as we start to move away from just being a technical community, which we've been doing for years, I don't mean to this a start now, but not everyone has that personality type or has those benefits, right? Like I just kind of won't curse on the video, but I don't care if somebody doesn't think I should be in the room, and not everyone has that thing. And so like where you're saying like I'm trying now to really I'm also like kind of a big person, right? So like I don't feel scared walking down the street, but my female friends might, right? And so it's been a thing for me where I've actually had to train myself to understand what my other friends may or may not feel comfortable doing on the, like going out to dinner. Let's walk. Let's not walk, Tara. Please don't make me walk out there. I'm small. So I've been trying to train myself because I do feel very sort of centered in this personal power to be able to elicit it from like to suggest to people where maybe they could help themselves, and also then saying like, no, I will make space for you at the table. Here's your chair. Like, come on over, right? Like you doing everything I can, just because I think open source is like a weird thing where there are some of us who found a lot of success and a lot of happiness in open source. But as the community grows and we want it to grow to these other types of people, we need to start holding that space for them.
And what about Richard Stallman?
Let's do
And time. No, it's a good question. I'd be happy to talk about it later.
Inclusion, diversity. Okay.
No, it's a
Definitely not going to go there right now, especially
That's
with
a
you.
whole day
Especially
long
with you,
talk.
Mickey. We
It
can
is
talk
a
about that
day-long
later.
reach out to us if you like on Twitter or Drupal.org or here at BadCamp. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our folks who've helped us with this presentation over the years. It's constantly evolving. Thanks.
Thank you.
Here's all of our resources.
Awesome use of the time.
Thank you.
We've been